Well, I would like to get started. I know we'll have a few folks joining, but just some introductory comments this morning. My name is Robin DeFalco. I'm the program manager for the Local Planning Capacity Grant Program. Um, this today's webinar will be recorded, and we will post this to the Prop 123 website and to the grant program webpage as well. So in case your colleagues missed this and you want to share, it will be there along with the slides. So any new program related content will get posted and update in the coming weeks. And I think we'll just go ahead and get started. So the focus for today's webinar is to hear from local governments. This is an informational overview of the new grant program, and we'll be going over the timeline, the application process, when you can expect to receive notification of awarded grants. And we'll also cover all of the eligible activities and project types. But the other really important focus for today's session is to gather stakeholder input from local governments. So it looks like the majority of our participants today are local government representatives. That's wonderful. If there are some consultants who are representing local governments and know your community's needs, I think we welcome your input as well. We expect this to be a very interactive discussion. We'll pause through each section asking for your feedback, input, comments, and questions. And your feedback will inform program guidelines when we publish the final guidelines. So please feel free to write comments and questions in the chat and in the Q&A. There is also the Q&A feature in the Zoom today allows you to submit a question anonymously if you choose to do that. I just want to let you know that is an option. And my colleagues on the call today will be helping us answer questions and see your questions in the chats. So again, briefly, my name is Robin DeFalco, Program Manager for the Local Planning Capacity Grant Program. And I want to introduce my colleagues. Also co-presenting with me today is Andy Hill.
Hi there. I manage the Community Development Office.
And Andy and I are with the Division of Local Government, which is part of DOLA. And this program and the other Prop 123 programs, we're closely partnering with our friends in the Division of Housing. I also want to briefly introduce a couple other colleagues from the Community Development Office. Mitch and Jessica, would you please briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. I can't see Jessica's screen, so I'll just do it really quickly. Hi, Mitch Hendrick. Thanks for being here, and I'll be taking notes and helping get the questions answered today.
Jessica, she is helping us redirect people in case they went to the wrong link. All right. Well, I will move on then, and we'll continue. So this Local Planning Capacity Grant Program is new. It was established as one of the funding programs through Proposition 123, which was a statewide ballot measure approved by Colorado voters in November of 2022. The funds became available July 1st, and this is an ongoing sustainable source of funding. We could say that about all the Prop 123 funding programs, this one being funds awarded direct to local government. So we are happy to have this new program to support local government efforts around affordable housing. So in this program, the key focus, I just wanted to say that DOLA has several grant programs that are part of Prop 123, including the affordable home ownership programs with Division of Housing and programs serving persons experiencing homelessness, also through the Division of Housing. We're all under that DOLA umbrella, and this Local Planning Capacity Grant Program is the one program through Division of Local Government, and it is specifically for local government planning departments. There's approximately 3 million available in funds to award in this first year of the program. Next year, we'll have twice as much money to award, approximately 6 million estimated. And most years we expect there to be about 6 million available to award. Oh, excuse me. I just need to go back. Oh, shoot. I can't go back. All right. Sorry about this, folks. There we go. Give me just a minute. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. I can no longer get back to my share screen button. There we go. And we're back on track. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Apologies for that. All righty. So we are expecting that most grant awards will come in between $50,000 to $100,000, but we do allow larger projects, especially if it is a multi-jurisdictional project. We do expect some regional collaboration projects to occur. So in this pilot round of funding, we recognize that there may be a variety of different project types, and we'll get a better understanding of what type of projects local governments intend to pursue in this pilot round. The awards may be smaller this round simply based on the fact that we have half as much funding, and we really want to try and support as many local governments as possible. We are estimating approximately 30 to 60 awards in this first batch. And again, hope to select a variety of project types that all strongly achieve the intended focus and priorities for this grant program, which we'll get into in a minute. But we also want to support different types of communities across the state of Colorado, that we're not just trying to award to the bigger municipalities. We hope to support all different types of communities in Colorado. The second round of funding we expect to open in spring 2024. So if your community wasn't funded in the first round, be patient. We may be able to get you some funding in that next round. All right, we have set this up with a local match from the local government. This is a direct cash match that essentially, with the eligible expenses that we would reimburse, we'll reimburse 80% of those costs, and then the local government is covering 20% of those costs. There are scenarios where you might have a big project and a big request, and simply because we don't have adequate resources this first year, a larger match may be required. And then there is the potential to structure the grant agreement so that it's not exactly 80-20. It could be up to this dollar amount, which is equivalent to the 20%, or just reflects a different portion of the project that your local government is covering. All right. And at this point, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Andy, to take us through the next section.
Thank you, Robin. Do you want us to pause now in case anybody had questions or concerns about the match or anything you covered, or should I blaze ahead?
I think that's a great idea. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any concerns or questions about any of the material that Robin covered? We've got a 20% match. That's pretty low for DOLA, for DLG. We put suggested maximums because frankly, we're waiting to see what the needs are. So if you have a need that exceeds or goes below that range, just reach out to us and we'd be happy to talk to you about it. Any questions or concerns? Okay, we'll interrupt as needed. All right, so I think the intent of Prop 123 for this grant program is pretty clear. It's about supporting and increasing the capacity of local government planning departments that are responsible for land use, permitting, zoning for affordable housing. So that's where we'll focus our efforts toward that major goal. If you don't have a planning department, you've got maybe 1 or 2 people that wear 1,000 hats. We get it, and that's okay. What we'll focus on is who does the planning work. And we have to draw these lines because it's not local government capacity that's written in the prop. It's local government planning capacity. So just to be really clear on that. We understand some smaller communities may have a team of 1 or none. We'll be flexible to the extent that we think we can. But the program can increase the capacity of local government planning departments. And again, we'll talk with you about if you have maybe a housing staff in a different department. We'd want to probably talk about some of those that are on the line on a case-by-case basis. But that's sort of the overall sort of context. Next slide. The focus is also very clear that it's about fast tracking, expediting affordable housing projects. So the program will support grants that meet the goals of increasing the capacity of local governments to make it easier to develop affordable housing and to approve that housing faster. So you've got expediting review, permitting, zoning, specifically for projects where 50% or more of the units are affordable. So it's not a requirement that local governments have to fast track all housing. It's only the affordable housing that meets the definition in the statute. Okay. Next slide. All right. So expediting review is a primary focus for this grant program. So our top priority, especially for the next few years, is to help local governments achieve fast track before 2027 so that you can remain eligible for funding in the next 3-year term. We'll prioritize development of fast track processes and the staff capacity that you need to expedite reviews. So some examples. We'll help fund the creation of your fast track process, the general streamlining of your code or your review process, and even funding the people that you need to ensure those eligible projects meet the time limit that's in the statute. We're starting the creation of fast track guidance next month, and we're targeting March for completion of that guidance for you all. Next. We've heard a lot of communities say, we already meet that timeline. We regularly approve development within 90 days. That's fantastic. This is not a major barrier for you, which is great. So you can still request funds to codify what you have, to make refinements, or to implement systems to document your review time. Next slide. The key objective is to make it faster or easier to develop affordable housing. And you all know where your stopgaps are, where your barriers are. And so we want to just support you in that work. So this is where we'll pause to answer some questions. And I see we do have some. The first one from Caleb, what can these funds be used for? Only for additional personnel? No. So it will cover the personnel that will review the expedited affordable housing, possibly some personnel or contractors to do some other sort of championing work. And actually, we're going to cover this more in a couple slides. I might wait on the rest because we'll really lay it out perfectly there. Does that mean fast track is required of all local governments? Fast track is required of all local governments that have had a filing or commitment filed and accepted by the Division of Housing, but it's not required until you submit your commitment for the next 3-year term, which is November 1st of 2026. So we have a few years, and that's why we want to really prioritize the local governments that are worried about meeting that timeline. Come to us for funding. We'll help support your work to get that expedited review process adopted. Can this be used to update your current building code? If your updates streamline and make it faster or easier, I suppose, to develop affordable housing and get those approved more quickly, then I would say yes. Robin, obviously jump in at any time if you want to add anything to what I'm saying. Does this apply to all types of DOLA funding? I want to be really clear that this is only for this grant program. So if you regularly apply for the Energy Impact Program, that's very separate from this. If you want to maintain your eligibility for the Prop 123 funding, and Robin had a slide earlier that talked about some of those, then in order to remain eligible, you have to, well, obviously you have to file your commitment and get it accepted. And then by the end of 2026, you have to have a fast track process in place, and you have to meet your commitment for the number of units. So this is just for this Prop 123 funding sources where you have to have this fast track process. And again, it's not fast track for all for all housing. It's fast track for affordable housing as defined in the statutes. Are there available templates or examples of municipal expediting initiatives? We are hoping to come up with some of those. We're starting that work next month, and we'll be putting that on the website as soon as we get it. Does a fast tracks review process need to be adopted by council for it to count? That's an excellent question, Shannon, and I think that question remains for us as well. We'll be working next month on, specifically Division of Housing will be leading this, working on all the rules and compliance with Prop 123. And so we'll get that information out as fast as we can. Is the 50% threshold in the statute, or could this system be implemented, say, for 25% or more? If you want to exceed the requirement in the statute, you totally can. And we'd love to help support that if that's your goal. Hopefully I answered that question correctly. Is it due by November 1st or December 31st? That's a really good question. In my mind, I'm making an assumption that when the next deadline to file your commitment for the next 3-year term is going to be November 1st, 2026. So in my mind, you'd want to have that as part of your commitment. But I am making an assumption. The Division of Housing may decide, nope, we're going to give people all the way to the last day of the year, and then we'll review it all then. So yes, that is still a question. Thanks for posing that.
And maybe if I could jump in real
Please.
quickly, I think another way to think about this one is that the statute, the Prop 123 law, the statute says that it needs to be in place by 2027. And by November 1st of 2026, you'll be filing a commitment for the next 3-year cycle of Prop 123. It always works in 3-year cycles. And you'll be telling in that filing, you'll be reporting that we comply now, or we just passed a resolution that this will be in place by January 1st of 2027. You could be in that scenario. But that's how you can think of it. Hopefully it's ready by November 1st, but you do have technically until January 1st of 2027, I believe.
Thank you, Robin. This next question is a really good one. How is a community supposed to fast track affordable housing if it involves a rezoning? I think that's a great question, and that's what we're going to start digging into next month. The language is clear in its intent in the statute, but there's a lot of details that need to be interpreted and sorted out. So we're going to be engaging stakeholders starting next month to come up with what we believe is the most solid interpretation of 123. And we'll work out those questions. So thank you for posing that and for giving us a scenario we can work with. Does the fast track process have to apply to all affordable housing being built or just 123 projects? And Robin, I'll lean on you, but in my mind, this is all affordable housing that meets the definition, not just ones that are 123 funded.
I think that's accurate.
If staffing capacity is an eligible activity, are local governments encouraged to apply for multiple years? Dawn, that's a great question and one we're wrestling with. I don't think this grant program is big enough to fund all the planning capacity needs that I've witnessed over the years in local governments. So I think what we're thinking right now, and we'd love your input, and especially some creative solutions to make sure that everybody has access to the funds. We're going to be looking at whether or not you've considered and have a plan for how you'll fund it going forward, which I know is sometimes an impossible task. So maybe at the end, we can talk more about your ideas for how we can look at that, but we certainly won't have enough money to fund everybody's needs every year. Okay, will future guidelines specify how the fast track process must be documented to meet compliance? Yes, and we're working on those. The Division of Housing will be leading that effort and we'll be reaching out next month. Worst case in 2026, if you do not meet the fast tracking requirement, no penalty except that you are unable to re-register for 2026. Right, if you haven't adopted a fast track process by the end of 2026, you won't be eligible to file a commitment and participate in the next 3 years. I do believe, and I suppose we have to punt this to the Division of Housing to consider next month, that you could maybe just sit out for a year and then try again. But I think you'd still at that point have to have a fast track process by then. So I'm going to turn it to Robin to add anything or refine anything I said, and then take the next slide. Thank you, guys. That was a great round of questions.
Yes, thank you. We'll proceed with the next section, which we'll keep getting into lots more details, and we hope that you have lots more questions when we come to the next pausing point. So the eligibility to apply, so far 120 jurisdictions have filed a commitment to increase affordable housing. That means 120 jurisdictions are currently eligible to apply for this grant program. Hopefully, if you haven't filed yet, you're planning to file soon. And you do have until the end of the day, November 1st, right up until 11:59 p.m. And as long as you've got your filing in, even if there's a technicality that needs correction, DOH will work with you. Division of Housing will work with you on that. So I assume everyone here today is planning to file their commitment if you have not already. We do expect that regional projects will be allowed in the local planning capacity grant program. We've heard of many examples across the state where municipalities are planning to work with counties or with neighboring municipalities because, of course, housing is a regional issue. And for the grant program, we just need one lead fiscal agent who would manage the application, the grant agreement, the reporting, and ultimately be responsible. But we welcome those partnerships. Partnerships with housing authorities and other nonprofits would also be welcome. But again, the local government entity needs to be the primary grantee. And when I say local governments, I also mean local and tribal governments every time we say that. So any questions or concerns before we move on from here? All right. So let's talk about all of the different types of projects and activities that would be considered eligible. We can cover staff administrative expenses or consultant expenses with independent contractors. Specifically, this would be the individuals involved in reviewing housing projects with an expedited timeline or supporting activities directly related to Prop 123. So if we're funding a person, that person needs to be directly involved in this effort. And even if 100% of their time isn't involved, we would only be funding that portion of their time that is directly involved. New technology solutions such as development review software is an eligible expense. And then the concept of lean business principles is a great example of how you would get to the root issues that maybe cause delay with your project development, project review process. So maybe a consultant would help assess your process and make revisements. Maybe internal staff are looking about how your different different entities within your local government that are reviewing these projects could work better together and improve internal practices. The regulatory changes, such as edits to your land use or development code, zoning code that would promote affordable housing development, those could be eligible activities. And then planning efforts to convert or preserve existing housing units from market rate to affordable, and the work that might be involved in creating the deed restrictions or land use restriction agreements. Those are things that, while not the primary focus of the program, could be an eligible component of your larger project. And then tracking documentation activities. So whether you're tracking your fast track, how many days did it take for this project to get approved, or how many units can we count towards our Prop 123 commitment? We realize those activities may stretch the capacity of your team and should be eligible. Continuing with eligible activities, the cost of posting your consultant RFP, the bid advertisements could be eligible. Attorney's fees associated with, directly associated with the project could be eligible. Drafting an intergovernmental agreement that is directly related to your Prop 123 efforts. We know there are some regional collaboration efforts to achieve, for example, a countywide unit count towards all of your Prop 123 goals. That's potentially eligible. And then this is kind of a broad statement, but activities that support local government's capacity to increase or expedite affordable housing, including navigating funding opportunities and grant applications. That's not something we usually get to allow, but if it aligns with this, it could potentially be allowable to cover those costs. We also think that in the right scenario, the data collection or site inventory of publicly owned land for future housing development projects, as long as it's part of the broader scope of your project that is focused on that fast track, those could be allowable costs. And we've put other here, and there are going to be some unique scenarios, and you might just have to ask us about that. We have a frequently asked questions document, which we haven't published yet because we're still collecting your questions and adding to that document, but it should be published prior to November 1st, and we'll get that to you soon. So at this time, I want to pause again and ask for all your questions about what we've covered in this section so far. And if folks like Mitch or one of my other co-hosts could help by reading the question aloud, we want to make sure that all questions are captured in the video recording as well as the answers.
Okay, let's start at the top. We had quite a few from this section. So from Caroline Mahoney was, if not eligible for the next 3 years in 2026, isn't it possible to sign up for a 2-year cycle?
Yes, Prop 123 does allow that if you, for example, if you do not sign up by November 1st of this year, you have the option to file your commitment or opt in next year by November 1st of 2024. At that time, you would be making a 2-year commitment of increasing affordable housing 6% over 2 years. You also have the option for a 1-year commitment if you file by November 1st of 2025. So always on those 3-year cycles, you always have that option, right? So if you have to sit out because you're ineligible in 2027, you could still refile in later 2027 for a 2-year commitment starting in 2028.
Okay, next question. This may be more appropriate in the guidelines section. I'm wondering if there are plans to address completeness of applications so that incomplete applications can be rejected and do not start the 90-day shot clock.
Yes, as Andy described earlier, that stakeholder engagement process around fast track interpretation of the statute, that is one of those key questions we hope to address. The way the statute's written, it says that the local government would define what a complete application means. But I think we all have that question, right? So the clock starts at a complete application, but then what, right? So we all have questions around that, and we hope to get some agreement around what that means and how it affects you in practice.
Next question is, if a county applies for a regional effort, would the communities participating in the regional effort also be eligible to apply individually for local capacity specific to the community?
Potentially, yes. I can imagine a scenario where a regional project is focused on X and your individual jurisdiction is focused on Y, and that those would be distinct projects. Again, one of our priorities is regional diversity, or excuse me, geographic diversity, meaning we want to try and support folks across the state. So multiple projects to the same entity contradicts that to some degree, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't be considered eligible.
Okay. Next question. Are there other specific examples or source reference for lean business principles for interagency coordination?
Sorry, Mitch, can you repeat the question?
Yes, I think it goes back to the previous slide. And the question was, are there other specific examples or source reference for lean business principles for interagency coordination?
Yes, and we have been collecting quite a few, what I think would be very helpful resources. We have examples really nationwide of communities that have done this. If you're familiar with the Six Sigma lean business principles, some of that stuff is, I think, very relevant and has been applied in the building and planning sense. So we will be able to provide some what I think are helpful resources. And again, we hope to publish some resources that are more Colorado specific. We also, I think, have some good examples of Colorado communities that might stand as models for you to look at.
Okay, next question. I think we have about 6 more. So this one pertains to regulatory changes. Could modifying public work design standards to promote affordable housing be included as an eligible activity?
I think potentially yes, as long as it, the outcome is what we've described, achieving those fast track goals. So to the degree that you make the case that in our community, we need to revise these design standards or we can't get these projects approved more quickly, then that would potentially be eligible. Andy, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it would be eligible. It might, I don't know how competitive it might be in the first year or two where we're really focusing on helping support local governments with fast track, but I think we'd want to see it because the more we see, the more we can think about evolving these program guidelines to address actual local government and tribal government needs.
Okay, next question is, can the funds cover attorney fees for IGAs?
Yes, we believe that it can. I mean,
Okay.
as long as it's directly related to Prop 123.
Okay, next question. What would be considered as code amendments that promote affordable housing? Would permitting of missing middle housing in single-family zone districts be included?
Potentially, we do have examples of communities that have decided that if a project meets this criteria, it is approved and allowed, and that could speed up that entitlement process, and you don't have to go through a rezoning process. So that could potentially be a great fit. Andy, other thoughts?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is, again, in these first year, 2 or 3, especially if you do some kind of administrative review or use by right, that kind of achieves both goals. And so that makes the project more competitive.
Okay, this one somewhat relates back to a previous question. Can you be in multiple partnerships with area municipalities and tribes?
Imagine that's possible. We would just have to look at that scenario.
Okay, next question is the state going to maintain a housing authority or provider contact list for those communities that do not have a housing authority? Most small towns will not apply if they do not have an actual builder to propose affordable housing.
I'm not sure the answer to that question. Andy, is that something you're familiar with?
I'm sorry, I think we skipped a couple of questions, so I missed it. Is the state going to maintain a housing authority or provider contact list? Most small towns will not apply if they do not have an actual builder to propose affordable housing. Yeah, Mark, this is a good point, and I think we've talked about this, like market realities and capacity before. The problem is housing authorities aren't eligible for the funds. So if you're worried that the town's not going to be able to meet its commitment, then I think you're asking, do we have lists of builders that you could contact? Maybe we should unmute on this one.
Well, and there's one other thought that I have, and just to clarify that housing authorities are eligible to apply for other Prop 123 funds, just not this grant program. I am vaguely familiar, and maybe we need to just follow up and point you towards someone who can speak better to this, but the state does have a middle income housing authority that I believe is intended to act as a housing authority for entities across the state that do not have their own housing authority. Again, I'm only minimally familiar with the existence of that program, so we might have to get you some more resources later.
Thank you. And just Andy, just to clarify, so when a comment is replied to in the chat, it bumps that one back down. So I still have the order in front of me with the next question.
Oh, thanks.
Being, do the eligible staffing activities have to be part of a new position, or could they be added, amended to an existing position with new duties?
That is a great question. We'll get into those details a little more later in the session. Think of it like this. I'll say that the simple explanation is in order for that position to be eligible, you need to be adding to and adding capacity, right? Otherwise, if you are replacing an existing budgeted role, it would not be considered eligible unless the person's prior role is revised. So again, we can get into more details later, but think of it as always needing to add to, not replace something that exists currently.
Okay, next question. We might need an unmute on this one, but it is DOLA developing any Prop 123 tracking software?
Not tracking software. We're going to publish guidelines on how to track the new units that are produced, and how to track or how to prove that you comply with the fast track provision by the end of 2026. But that's just printed guidance, not a software or an app necessarily.
Okay, just 3 more questions. When working with housing authority projects that are highly dependent on CHFA funding, which can delay a site plan, does this count against the municipality when the actual review has been fast tracked?
I'm not sure I could answer that question at this time. It partly depends on when we define a complete application. What is the start that the clock starts counting? Andy, other thoughts?
And when it receives its approval, and which I think means building permit, but I think we're going to visit that. It might mean final development review approval. It might mean building permit. So we understand that CHFA, sometimes you have to apply 2, 3 more times, but it's when you get it approved. So yeah, that's might be an issue.
Next is, will this cover rezoning cost and or subdividing or surveys?
Potentially rezoning costs. I'm not sure about the subdividing or surveys. I don't believe it would necessarily cover those.
Yeah, I might add, it won't cover what we would consider pre-development costs. That's helpful.
And it's also worth noting that the Prop 123 fast track requirement excludes subdivisions from that requirement.
Okay. Next question is, in other documents, it sounded like site analysis on publicly owned land is an eligible activity, but was not listed here. Is it eligible?
Site analysis, it sort of depends on how we define site analysis. I think we're trying to narrow that scope to really site inventory, right? That if you're a local government and you say, we've got these publicly owned pieces of land and we think we want to put housing on them, we're not covering what's typically considered pre-development costs or, your environmental review or your surveying work, but we would potentially cover, for example, the staff time to inventory those properties and consider future plans for developing them, but not necessarily hiring the engineers to come out and do that additional pre-development type work.
Okay, last question. What could site analysis of publicly owned land for future affordable housing projects include? Soil reports, engineering, etc.
I feel like we kind of just answered that. Is there anything else we should add to the answer?
I would just say, I think your feedback on what you really need, what are the barriers to getting the projects done, share those with us so we can sort of wrestle with the details. I think that would be really helpful.
Part of the reason that we're narrowing the scope of what is eligible under this grant program is that we know that there's other funding available that would cover that type of pre-development work. Later in the slide deck, we have some links we can share. In particular, CHAFA has I believe it's called small, it's a technical assistance grant that can do that. Your energy impact grants through DLG could potentially cover some of those pre-development costs as well.
All right, one last question, Robin, just came in for clarification. So just to clarify, rezoning is not excluded from the fast track approval process. When we're
talking about the fast track approval process, it is unclear in the way the statute was written whether the period of time that it takes to rezone the parcel, whether that is counted in the 90-day window. I think what I was trying to answer earlier, and maybe I misunderstood the question, was that for example, a consultant working on helping you rezone, doing a broad rezone that it maybe incentivizes affordable housing, would be an eligible cost under the grant program if it helps to expedite approval of affordable housing. So I hope that clarifies the distinction. So there's this program and then there's the fast track requirement. And I don't believe the rezoning is necessarily captured in that 90-day clock.
Right, the language says a final decision must be made on any application for a special permit, a variance, or other development permit, excluding subdivisions. So if that's helpful.
Okay, and that's it for the questions at this time.
Okay, we'll move to the next section. So impact and outcomes are really important, especially in this first round. When you apply, think about what is the profound impact that this funding will have for your community. What do you hope to achieve as an outcome of this project? And how will you measure that success? How will you know that you've made a difference with this work? So we're not asking for a complicated, data collection and metrics. We are asking you to just think about how you would be able to measure that impact, how you'll be able to tell us that you believe this funding would have a tremendous impact what is made possible because of this funding for you, especially in regards to fast track, especially in regards to achieving your Prop 123 goals. So in the scoring criteria, again, we'll be looking closely at which projects are addressing fast track, and then which ones, what impact will your project have? Readiness is important, that you don't have a half-baked idea, you have a really solid plan for what you're going to do. Even if that solid plan is hiring consultants to help us figure out what we need to do, but we think we want to go in this direction and have the consultants help us understand what's the best approach, right? That's what we consider a solid plan. Included in that, what's your plan for the long-term sustaining of this new staff person you hope to add, if that's a component, or if you're adding software and our funds help you implement the new software, do you have a plan for covering the ongoing cost of those licensing fees on that software? Do you have support from local leadership, your electeds or your city manager? And that support is demonstrated sometimes by showing the commitment to the ongoing costs of bringing on new team members, or transforming your building codes or zoning codes. Again, we're looking at financial need and geographic diversity. And then the organizational capacity for project and grant management. Now, we recognize that some, especially smaller communities, are saying, I don't have any capacity now. And we realize that, and we hope that the grants would help you with that capacity. We also need some degree of confidence that you'll be able to get this project done, you'll be able to get your reporting in, and that you can just navigate this grant. So in the long term, we hope we can be flexible about various funding needs and project types. In the short term, we are very focused on fast track in these early years of rolling out the grant program. So again, I want to pause here and take a few questions before we move on to the next section.
Okay, we just have two. So the first question is, can regulations be written such that eligibility for fast track requires project to be situated in an appropriate existing zone district?
We know some examples of communities that have said this area is zoned for example, multifamily housing. And we have identified places where we want affordable housing. And that can help expedite, make it a quicker process. So that sounds potentially eligible for me. Andy, other thoughts on how to answer that question?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, if it's like an overlay zone that allows administrative approval, makes things faster, communicates clearly, I think that's great. I don't think you're saying that you would limit affordable housing just in certain places, unless it's tied to infrastructure availability and things like that. But yeah, that's something we'd want to talk to you more about. Interesting idea.
Okay, next question. Does it have to be new staff? What if it is a part-time position that you would like to move to full-time in order to help with fast track?
That's a great example. That is adding capacity, right? So that would be eligible. This half-time person being moved to full-time and the grant funds are covering that difference. That's a perfect example of something that is eligible.
Okay, next question. As it relates to financial need, if Proposition HH passes, it will impact revenues for counties and may make it more difficult to commit matching funds or continue funding for staffing, for example. Will that be taken into account?
I'm going to say that for now, there are a lot of hypotheticals, including whether the measure passes, and I think different communities are going to be impacted differently. So I think it's fair to say we always try to take into account those types of things. And we know that one size does not always fit all communities across Colorado. So I think we would take that into consideration, but I can't exactly say how.
And Robin, I might just pose the question. I think we were talking about allowing local governments that can demonstrate extreme financial hardship for match reductions. It's not going to be an easy process for communities, but in a case like that or others, we can imagine we'd want to be able to help out.
Right, do we have any other questions, or should we move on to the next section?
We have 3 more questions for the time being. Okay, so question 1. Is the state legislature looking to make any amendments to Prop 123 in this next session?
Potentially, and I will say that I haven't heard of anything specifically, so I can't speak to that. I do know that I think as we've all been, those of us who've been part of the Prop 123 rollout have heard from communities several things that just don't line up for certain types of communities, certain size communities, and there is some sentiment that it might be nice to see some legislative changes that would still honor the intent of Prop 123, but might help make it more feasible for certain types of communities to participate at all or to be successful. So we've heard that there's a desire for that, but we don't know of any specific plans.
Okay, and another question is, how long or how many months can the funding support the added capacity position?
That is to be determined. I think we're envisioning that in this first round, it's reasonable that a project awarded would have up to 2 years to complete the work. So if you're looking at 2 years of funding this individual, you still have to look at your budget and how much of that individual it could support, right? And again, looking at the long term, and there might be a structure where we fund this percent of that person in the first year and less the second year as the local jurisdiction takes on a greater share of that budgetary cost.
Okay, next question is, does 90 days include the time required by the applicant to resubmit reviews?
Prop 123 has some detailed provisions about when the clock pauses and goes back to the developer for changes. And so I'm not going to get into all of those details. And although those details are somewhat, clear and detailed, they also leave some room for interpretation. So again, through that stakeholder process, hoping to get a better understanding and a common understanding of how that applies in reality.
Okay, last question. If a jurisdiction doesn't have specific local leadership support, can these funds be used for further study to try to gain that local support?
My first thought is that we've got some great funding available through a couple of other programs at Division of Local Government that might be a better fit for that, I'd say, kind of preliminary work to get your community started working on affordable housing issues. In particular, I'm thinking of the Energy Impact Grants, has a planning grant for the More Housing Now planning work that would support that effort, with applications due December 1st for the current round. There should be future rounds. And then the other grant program is called the Strong Communities Planning Grant. They just closed the first round of that, but they will have a second round of planning in 2024, I'll say, with the date to be announced. So we would encourage you to look at those other resources. Division of Housing also has a great program called Local Officials Affordable Housing Toolkit, really great resources to help elected leaders learn more about and understand affordable housing issues and what kind of approaches to pursue that would work for your community.
Okay, let's see, there's one more question. Is the state looking to amend the PUD enabling statutes by requiring affordable housing as part of a rezoning to PUD?
Sounds like you're asking about legislator intentions, which I don't, it would certainly be too early to say. I don't know anything about that, but I haven't heard of anything specific to that at this point in time. All right, so let's move on to the next section. And at this point, I'm going to hand it back over to Andy as our lead presenter.
All right, thank you. And thanks for these questions. These are great. Okay, what we have here before you, I won't read it all, but I'll just mention first. This is our proposed timeline. We really want to stick to these targets. It's a pretty ambitious timeline for us. So it could change, but this is our plan. So we will take your input through next Monday. Then we'll refine these guidelines and then request letters of interest November 1st through December 4th. That way you can fill out an easy form to test your idea. Then we will invite the most competitive projects to apply, posting a notice of funding availability on January 3rd. Only jurisdictions invited to apply will have access in the portal to submit an application. We're expecting to make awards in February, and grant agreements can take maybe a couple of months, sometimes sooner, where awardees provide key materials very promptly. And then finally, we'll plan to use the LOI process, that letter of interest process, just this first time. And then we'll move to a regular application approach going forward. So that's our proposed timeline. So any concerns? What we're trying to do is move as quickly as we can for you. So you have access to the funds as soon as possible. But we don't want to move too fast for your processes. And so the first thing I see with this ambitious timeline is 1 month in January enough time for you to get your board approval and submit an application for funding? And I should note, we are flexible and will generally allow for official action to happen after January 31st, as long as it's calendared and before we make our decisions. So concerns with the timeline? Can you all do it in 1 month? I can't see everybody's faces to know if they're doing a thumbs up or if you
Seeing
have.
a couple answers in the chat, a yes, and then an appreciation of the desire to move fast.
Okay. So most are saying yes, some are saying might be tough.
Now, yes, seeing
6
some
weeks.
yes.
This is great. We will reconsider that based on all of this feedback. Maybe there's some flexibility we can allow. Other questions that are related to this? We've got to submit our input, who do we send it to, and what is your preferred method? Robin, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Primarily go ahead and send it to me. So I think most of you have my contact information. If you don't, well, maybe one of my colleagues can help drop it in the chat. It's fine if you want to pick up the phone and give me a call so that you can do clarifying questions and give your input. Email is great because then I can have a record of it. And we will be accepting that feedback through the end of the day on Monday, the 23rd. And I will also say that we've been compiling your input since February of 2023. So we did a survey a long time ago. We got a lot of input. We've been interacting with communities at public events throughout our Prop 123 technical assistance. But this is sort of our final wrap up of taking more input. I do see a hand up from Jillian. Go ahead.
Hi, Robin. I just wanted to share on the timeline. We navigated through something similar with needing board approval for grant applications for the Main Street Open for Business, and it was a really short turnaround. We put out an example to adopt ahead of time, allowing, giving the community's authority or whoever the designee applicant was within the town authority to apply up to a certain dollar amount with town board approval ahead of that grant application. I can share that resolution and send that out if it might be a great resource for communities to have, which kind of bypasses the every month needing the town board to approve those grant applications.
I really appreciate that offer of sharing and that suggested approach. We have seen similar things. It sort of depends on folks' local requirements. So the other thing is that we're hoping to get that notification that you've been that you're invited to apply. We hope to do that around mid-December. Again, we're not exactly sure, and with the holidays in there, we realize that also poses a challenge for folks, but hoping that once you're notified that you're invited to apply, that's the point when you would act quickly to get it agendized, if that's your process that's needed. So we're trying to give you as much advance notice as possible. I see another hand up, Dwayne or DJ.
Yes, good morning. So my question is, I've been trying to write it in the chat for like 5 minutes, and I can't seem to get it all in there in a way that makes sense without speaking out loud. So in some of the things that are authorized in this this grant cycle that we're looking at, some things are authorized and some things aren't. And then you guys pointed toward other capacities, other grants that are available. And as we talk about capacity and capacity building, if I have to apply for 6 different grants to get a project off the ground, managing those grants become a nightmare. But without combining those grants into a single way to do a project, like it seems like, I'm glad there's a lot of money out there, and I'm glad that they have some specific things available. But it would be great if DOLA would create a way that you could project a project and say, this is what I want to do. How can we combine some of those various grant fundings into a single grant cycle process with management, so that I don't have to manage 5 grants for a single project? Because that starts to get really complicated when we talk about engineering for this grant, fast tracking for the same project, and then looking towards CBDG to do infrastructure improvements for the same project to keep the land costs down. Like, managing all those becomes a full-time job, and I don't know how to manage all of those, and I don't know how to write that in the question, and I don't really expect an answer. But like, I'm glad it's all out there, but how do we get to the point where we can manage those things? If we have to do 6 grants for a single 125 unit project, and I have a city staff of 14 people, including public works and everybody else.
Right. I hear you loud and clear. I think there are dozens, many people on this call who probably share the sentiment, and how we solve that is a little more complicated. And if not, one of the main issues is different sources of funding, right? Like the Strong Communities Planning grants, federal, this is state money, and they have different requirements. So that is a challenging thing, but it's great for us to hear that feedback and contemplate how we can continue to make state government work better for local government. That is a primary objective of DLG, certainly. And again, not sure that we can solve it today, but it's worth continuing to think about. So thank you for sharing it.
2 more questions. One from the Q&A, which is about grant admin and expenditures. Will each expenditure or invoice under an approved project need to be split along the agreed upon 80-20 match or whatever is agreed upon in the grant agreement? Or is this relevant only to the project total costs? Similarly, assuming RFRs are allowed in between quarterly deadlines, will each RFR submission need to enforce that match commitment 80-20? So 80% a grant and 20% match.
Great question. And that is typically how we do it. RFR stands for request for reimbursement. These are reimbursement grants. And so normally quarterly reporting would be required. We do, at a minimum, we do allow you to report and request reimbursement more often, especially in the early around with the first awards, and especially for those where we're funding administrative staff. I think we want to see at least a few monthly reimbursement requests come in to make sure that we're doing the right documentation that allows us to approve your reimbursement. We don't want to get 3 months down and find out that you haven't done the right documentation and we can't reimburse you. So back to the key question, usually we do that as you take 100% of the eligible expenses and split it 80% for reimbursement, 20% represents your local match. And it's usually consistent every time you report. There could be an exception to that based on your specific project scope, but that's usually how it's done.
Okay. Last question for the time being. What would the timeline be to spend the money if awarded?
That's Great, and I think we have, well, I did say earlier, approximately 2 years. So once we do a grant agreement, we're looking at an approximately 2-year window that you have to complete the work. There's the potential to extend, but we want you to get these, we want you to get the expedited review done as quickly as possible. And once that's accomplished, spending down the rest of the funds could be over a few more years. Any other thoughts on that, Andy?
Yeah, only because I answered in there up to 2 years to be consistent. But yes, thank you for mentioning, Robin. If you can just explain and defend why your project will take 3 years, for instance, just explain that, and we'll take that into consideration, of course.
Any other questions, Mitch?
Not at the moment. Just a thank you message. So that's it for the time being.
And Andy, carry on.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for giving us feedback on the timeline. That's always so helpful. All right, so the next round of funding, like Robin said, we'll have twice as much money next state fiscal year, so July. This year, we only have a half a year's worth of revenues. We may roll out the cycle a little bit early next year so that folks can get started sooner. Then we'll establish a funding calendar going forward. We're going to prioritize 123 compliance, new grantees over time, and geographic diversity to the extent that we can. That'll be important to us. We're also toying with the idea of coming up with a mini grant process, maybe grants under 50,000 that could be awarded without a competitive cycle. So it would still be competitive. You'd have to meet all the scoring criteria, but we could do those maybe more frequently. And so we're still thinking about that. If you have reactions or insights on what could be helpful there, we'd love to hear it. Okay. Questions, input, and next steps. All right, so we will receive input by phone or email, and I put Robin's email in there, by Monday. Sorry for the fast timeline. We're trying to manage a lot of things at once, but ultimately just want to get this launched for you all. So feel free to mark up the Word doc version of the draft guidelines, or just send an email, or even call if you need to. And that's Robin or myself, either way. We've got about 13 days left to November 1st. So if you haven't already, file your local government commitment, local or tribal government commitment. And just a note, we still have some technical assistance available. So if you're closed, but you just need to look at the numbers a different way, or you're not sure, you want to run it by someone, reach out to Robin or I, and we'll hook you up with some assistance. And then finally, the letter of intent, or LOI, we're doing that because it gives us a picture of demand, what types of projects, and helps us assess whether your project is a fit with the program without you spending a lot of time filling out a formal application. We may refer you to other funding sources if we think that's a better fit, but we'll do everything we can to try to find funding to support your needs. Next slide. All right, so you can, I think somebody's going to drop in the links there into the chat, but all the details will be published online. We have these two sites, Prop 123 website, which is an Engage DOLA website. There's opportunity to look at all the information, pose questions, and so on. And then specific for this grant, the Local Planning Capacity Grant Program website. That's the second URL. So check back for updates. Our hope is that we can get the program guidelines posted before November 1st, but that's a quick timeline for us. Certainly by November 1st, our goal is to have the program guidelines and the LOI form available for you. All right, next slide. So at this point, it's 10:15. We've covered all the basics. We've pointed out the questions that we have for you. We're certainly happy to continue to take questions either in the chat or the Q&A, or you can unmute. If there aren't enough questions, we have more slides that we can go through to prompt questions. But maybe at this point, we can we can just, I should mention before I turn it over. As Robin said before, everything that we're covering is in the written materials, the draft program guidelines. We will post the frequently asked questions soon. You can refer back, you can rewatch this video recording again, or you can just contact us with questions. So now it's your chance to ask us some questions.
Sure.
And feel free to ask your specific questions about your specific community. Be brave. You can raise your hand and speak up. And Mitch, it sounds like you have one from the chat.
There's quite a few actually. So I can start there unless anyone wants to unmute. And the first would be, depending on how many 10 to 30K could be helpful to add capacity or software or amend software to support or expand existing programs related to housing. The next bit of information is, you mentioned you'll be analyzing how this impacts rezoning next month. How can we participate?
If you would like to participate in the fast track stakeholder engagement process, please drop your name in the chat and my colleagues will collect your name and contact info and we'll follow up with you next month. We already have a list of folks who have expressed interest and we definitely want participation from many different types of communities. Developers for a nonprofit will also be participating in that process. And essentially we'll be interpreting what is written in statute and how that applies in reality to a variety of different scenarios and considering different approaches that would comply with the statute.
Okay, just a few more. Just to clarify, the Monday deadline is for program guidance input. Fast track input will be at a later date.
That's correct. The Monday deadline is just about this grant program and how it works for your community or doesn't, or what you hope could be included in the future.
Okay, the next comment is, can you share the Word doc you asked for comments on? I don't see it on the website.
That Word doc is shared currently on the Prop 123 Engage DOLA site. And there is a post in the news feed about the local planning capacity grant program. There's a link where it says download draft program guidelines. Hopefully one of my colleagues can help with the link. Thanks.
Okay, let me see what else we have. We have a couple in various notes of interest to join the stakeholder input piece. And then another question is, you may have said this and I missed it, but if our community submitted for a Strong Communities grant, will we be notified of those award decisions before December 4th? There may be opportunities to align grant proposals into a single project.
I'll ask Andy or Mitch to chime in on timing of that.
I guess first question to Rebecca would be, for which Strong Communities program are you referring to, the planning grant or the infrastructure grant?
Hi, Mitch. Hi, everyone.
Hey.
I'm referring to the planning grants, and my question is really, for example, we requested in our grant application funding for partial staffing, and if there, there could be an opportunity to achieve a full-time staff position that's managing multiple projects and grants. And it would be helpful to know going in, how to best pitch a grant application for the local capacity grants if we had more clarity on that program as well.
Yeah, we will let folks know before December 4th if they've been awarded, and we can reach out to you at that time to come up with a strategy.
Great, thank you.
Okay, and there are a good handful of contacts in the chat. So if anyone has a question, I'd like to just unmute and ask it. Please feel free to do so.
And while folks are finding the raise hand button, where will the recording be posted? Robin, you said you're going to put that on the LPC grant program site or the 123 site?
I think we'll put it both places so you don't have to go looking. It'll just be both places. Cheryl, go ahead.
Hi, just a quick comment based on that timeline back with the application process. With requiring the 20% match, which is a good idea, I think, but it's gonna take time as well to get that commitment from the city. They'll require us to do that. And just a heads up, like to get to city council, if I needed to get to them right away, it's gonna take me at least a month to get the necessary documents, paperwork, pre-meetings, everything that I need to do to get something to council. And that would be just the first round. Then there would be a second round, hopefully a week later. Just a heads up on that. Is we kind of have the opposite problem of a small town. We have so much bureaucracy that it makes things a little longer.
Thank you. And that's exactly the feedback we need, right? Different types of governments have different needs, and we want to make sure we're not missing something important. So I think we're capturing that feedback in our notes, and we'll consider how that impacts the official grant deadline, the formal application deadline. I see Dwayne's hand up. Go ahead, DJ.
So for the funding for personnel, we have a URA that is setting up a new TIF district to build mostly like 51% affordable homes. Would we be able to use that capacity building to bring a person on full time to help? Because we're going to hire a consultant to develop the plans for the TIF that we're going to use to build the infrastructure. Because our biggest problem we have is a developer doesn't want to come to our community because it costs so much. We don't have that large of a need where it's going to make dollars and cents for them. So would we be able to fund a person for the URA to help set up that TIF and start that process and get all of those things underway so that we can build the land and begin those processes? Or would I need to actually just use the consultant route instead of bringing on an employee, hire a consultant? And again, same question, would that qualify as far as setting that up for the long-term build out of that affordable housing?
Yeah, great question. And potentially, yes, if a few things, right? So if it's a consultant, then their primary focus is the fast track, and that these other elements of helping you achieve Prop 123 goals, meaning these are units that count towards your Prop 123 commitment, and the time managing that is a component of their bigger efforts. Potentially, yes, that's allowed. If it is a staff employee person, that person is ideally in the planning department, with some exceptions if you don't have a planning department. And again, focused on fast track, but these other things that help you achieve the goals of Prop 123 could potentially be kind of sub projects that are eligible for reimbursement. Hope that clarifies. DJ, anything else you want to add on that, or if Andy wants to chime in?
I could ask questions all day long because that's just how it would work.
Well, we can always chat later too about your specific needs and kind of dig into those details. We have about 8 minutes left until 10:30. So Cheryl, I see your hand still up. I wasn't sure if you had a new question.
Nope, sorry, I'll take it down.
No worries. Anybody else? Other questions in the chat or the Q&A? Did my colleagues get a chance to look in the Q&A section?
Q&A is cleared, but there is a question in the chat. Is the intention to apply for funding for each use of funds for each project, or can we submit in bulk across many projects for reimbursement?
This is going to be one project when you submit your local planning capacity grant project. And this is going to encompass work across your jurisdiction that meets these goals, right? So when we say project, I hope you're not referring to a specific housing development project, because this would be potentially eligible to support those projects as part of capacity, with fast track being your priority. That said, we have tried to structure the grant agreement so that all eligible activities are under one broad umbrella. And so if you are awarded based on this being a strong and competitive proposal, you don't have to worry about how much is in each budget line item. It will be one pot of funding that you draw down through reimbursements to achieve the stated project objectives. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, just one more question in the chat. And Caroline said, thanks, it does answer her question. So next question is, the goal for our town is to 1, provide affordable housing in the form of tiny homes, 2, zone appropriate public land for that zoning, 3, horizontal infrastructure will be needed, 4, sell the lots to the public to build on, not a developer. Which of these could be eligible for funding?
Robin, I have it in front of me if that helps.
Thank you. That does help.
Yeah. So these are really different items, and I wish we had one fund that could just fund all of it, but we don't. Just the rules around each program that we have to live within. So if the goal is to provide tiny homes for affordable housing, zoning the land for that, you know, may be eligible for 123, but I would say wouldn't be the strongest application, especially in the first few years. But you can go to Strong Communities Planning Grant Program, and that will open up early next spring. And that would make a lot of sense. The horizontal infrastructure, you'll probably have to go to infrastructure funding programs, such as the Division of Local Government's Energy Impact Program, the More Housing Now within that program. I would say Strong Communities, but that one I think is overprescribed. And then and selling the lots to the public to build on, not a developer. I don't know that we could fund that. Robin, do you have any reactions?
I think you said that well. Thank you.
Okay, that's it for questions in the chat.
I think there was one more I wanted to revisit so that I didn't, I might have created this question. For Prop 123, what definition of affordable housing is being used? Did we already cover that? There we go.
We have this slide that, because we anticipated someone would ask that, and this is how it is defined in Proposition 123. And so 60% AMI, up to 60% AMI for rentals, up to 100% AMI for sale, and which costs the household less than 30% of monthly income. We do have this note about the potential for higher AMIs to also be counted as affordable housing. Specifically, the rural resort jurisdictions have the statute allows for this if they've filed a petition to use higher AMIs and it's been accepted. And then CHFA's, the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, otherwise known as CHFA, the Prop 123 funds that they'll be awarding allows for some AMI averaging. So you could have something over 100 AMI as long as the project has some lower AMIs and they average out.
Okay, a couple more questions have been added. This is from the Q&A. Our question has staffing from multiple departments that as part of their duties, they review development applications. If a process is established to have a specific staff or consultants responsible for affordable housing review, would that be eligible?
I think the answer is yes. I may not have followed the question clearly. Andy, do you agree?
I was looking up a funding thing.
Essentially, if the city was to actually establish a formal process and to have specific staff or consultants, would that be eligible? And Scott, if you'd like to unmute and if you want to add any clarity, feel free to do so.
Sure. What we would be looking at is we have multiple departments, and the people that are doing those reviews, that is one part of their task and their job. And if we were to develop a process that had either consultants or specific staff that would be assigned for fast track review of affordable housing projects, would that be eligible for funding?
It sounds to me like yes, it would. Something along those lines, as I recently spoke with a jurisdiction that has worked commendably in the past year to implement fast track. and it involved cross departments, working together to achieve that outcome. And so just recognizing that it may involve multiple people in multiple departments, and we would, I think, try to look at each situation and consider the eligibility for those unique scenarios.
Okay, last question for the time being is, what costs are included in housing costs for the less than 30% from both a rental and for sale project? MJ, do you mind clarifying?
Is that about, does it count like transportation or some of the other costs under income?
Yeah, specifically what I was asking for, as we're doing the calculation on the for sale housing piece, I assume that we're counting principal, interest, taxes, insurance, is homeowners association fees or special district fee. Well, special district, I guess, would be taxes here. That's what I'm trying to figure out, is what are we counting towards that 30%? And then in the rental, is it just the rent, or is it also including the utilities?
Right. So the question is partly about, like, in the case of rental, is it gross rent, or some of this is based on, this is about how you count the units and which units count towards your local government commitment at the end of 2026. I'll start by saying that DOLA is working again on a stakeholder engagement process to interpret the way Prop 123 is written, and some gray areas there, and what counts and what doesn't count, and how do you, the other questions like, what about dormitory housing and things like that. So stay tuned for a definitive answer on that in the coming months. That said, when you're counting units, you want to look back at your commitment filing and whether you based yours on median family income versus median area median income, or which changes the gross rent or not. And then home ownership is a slightly different question with all of those other things like insurance. And ultimately the answer is we don't yet know.
No, we just have some units that are starting to, that we're starting to think about counting, and just want to be clear on how we move that project forward.
I would advise that for now, count them, keep them in your list, and then it'll be determined later whether it meets whether it complies. We are at 10:32, so we're going to wrap up here today. I hope you have all the confirmation. I think we've added that to the chat, contact information, so you can follow up with Andy and I in the future with your input. Reach out to us over the next few days, and stay tuned. Visit back to our websites for newly published content as it becomes available leading up to November 1st. Thank you all for participating. Oh, Andy, go ahead.
Sorry, you're going to post the slides too, right? So people can scan the slides?
Yes, the recording of today's session and the slides.
Robin's got some great slides like this one that cover more FAQs. I think you guys would get some value out of it. Thank you.
I'm not sure if Bill's still here, but there was a question about, are there some templates for fast track code language or program guidelines that could be shared either from other municipalities or DOLA itself?
I would say yes, we do have some great examples of other communities we could probably point you to. Oftentimes that code language is publicly available, and so it's just knowing where to look, and we could help refer you to that. Anything that is specific to Prop 123 is still a little unofficial. We know communities have been working on expedited review, and we've got a lot of examples of Colorado communities that do that. Whether it complies with Prop 123, we can't yet say until we get through with that guidance process. But we hope to point to some great Colorado examples and some other approaches, even statewide, that might work.
Thank you everyone for attending and for your input. Please call and share more as it comes to you.
Yeah. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. We'll end the webinar and the recording now.